You walk into a dark theater carrying a bucket the size of your torso. You didn't plan to buy it. You told yourself you weren't even hungry. But the moment you smelled that butter drifting through the lobby, something in you decided the popcorn was non-negotiable. Why does this exact snack in this exact room feel so unshakably right? The answer isn't about taste. It's about 100 years of engineered habit, ancient brain wiring, and a trick your nervous system doesn't even know is being played on it. Start with the smell. Movie theater butter isn't really butter most of the time. It's a compound called diacetyl, the same molecule that gives real butter its rich buttery smell. Theaters pump it through the air specifically because smell reaches your brain faster than any other sense. It skips several processing steps that sight and sound go through. It travels straight to a region called the olfactory bulb, which sits right next to your amygdala and hippocampus. Those are the parts of your brain responsible for emotion and memory. So when that smell hits you, you're not just noticing food. You're being flooded with the emotional residue of every other time you smelled it. Every childhood trip, every date night, every excited weekend afternoon, your brain doesn't experience the smell as new information. It experiences it as a memory being replayed. Now think about the crunch. There's a reason popcorn, and not something quiet like a candy bar, became the defining sound of a movie theater. Sound researchers have long noted that crunchy foods activate more sensory feedback than soft ones. Every bite delivers a burst of sound directly through your jawbone into your inner ear, layered on top of the sound you hear through the air. This is sometimes called bone conduction, and it makes crunchy food feel more satisfying not because of flavor, but because of the sheer intensity of sensory input. Your brain interprets that intensity as pleasure. It's the same reason chips outsell soft snacks by a wide margin nearly everywhere in the world. Crunch isn't a side effect of the food. Crunch is the product. But none of that explains why popcorn specifically became attached to movies. For that, you have to go back almost a century to the Great Depression. Movie theaters in the 1930s actually resisted selling snacks at first. Owners thought food would ruin the carpets and distract from the picture. Street vendors sold popcorn outside for a few cents because corn was cheap and the equipment to pop it was portable. When ticket sales collapsed during the Depression, theater owners noticed something strange. The vendors selling snacks outside were making more money than the theaters themselves. So theaters started selling popcorn indoors, almost as an act of financial desperation. It worked so well that popcorn sales alone kept some theaters from shutting down completely. The pairing wasn't designed. It was an accident of economics that turned into a permanent ritual. Here's where it gets stranger. Once a ritual repeats enough times, your brain stops treating it as a choice. It starts treating it as a rule. Psychologist Ivan Pavlov demonstrated over a century ago that a neutral stimulus, paired repeatedly with a rewarding one, eventually triggers the same response on its own. His dogs didn't just salivate at food. Eventually, they salivated at the sound that used to come right before the food. You are, in a very real sense, one of those dogs. Movie theater plus popcorn smell plus dim lighting equals a reward response your brain now fires automatically, whether or not you're actually hungry. This is exactly what a famous and slightly uncomfortable study revealed. Cornell researcher Brian Wansink ran an experiment where he gave moviegoers free popcorn. Half received fresh popcorn, half received popcorn that had been left out for 5 days, stale enough that test subjects rated it as noticeably unpleasant when they tasted it blind. And yet, in the theater, people still ate nearly as much of the stale popcorn as the fresh popcorn. Why? Because the eating wasn't being driven by taste at all. It was being driven by the environment. Dark room, big screen, bucket in hand. The behavior had become automatic, disconnected from whether the food was actually good. So the question shifts. If it's not really about the popcorn, what is your brain actually chasing? This is where a strange psychological phenomenon called excitation transfer comes in. Communication researcher Dolph Zillman proposed that when your body is aroused by one experience, like the tension of a thriller or the adrenaline of an action sequence, that arousal doesn't fully switch off between scenes. It lingers, it bleeds into whatever you're doing next. So, if you're chewing loudly through a tense chase scene, some of that leftover adrenaline gets folded into the simple act of eating popcorn. The snack starts to feel more intense, more satisfying, almost thrilling.